Last winter, Tom Vander Ven, retired member of the English department, corresponded with a number of colleagues and students, former students, to gather remembrances of Chuck, and Tom composed this brief essay, which includes quotations from those letters, as well as a few words of Chuck's own. So it's called Vermilion to Vermilion, and it begins with two lines from the Windover poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins. And blue bleak embers, ah, my dear, fall, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion. When an old and valued friend dies, we want to reach out and furl him in superlatives and memories that somehow trump mortality, which can't be done, but still we try. Chuck grew up in Vermilion, South Dakota, amid grasslands and cornfields, and his life ended on the last day of a cruise in the Vermilion Sea, the Sea of Cortez, the Gulf of California. His studies in romantic literature, Australian frontier culture, nature and travel literature such as Blue Highways, hewed a motif that filled his classrooms throughout his long career at IUSB. In retirement, he and his wife Joyce traveled to see Carpathian wolves and lynx in Romania, cruised the Danube Delta on a houseboat, toured the Galapagos Islands, and ventured north to see polar bears in Churchill, Manitoba. A year ago, Chuck wrote, "We think periodically about relocating, especially to Oregon. It's especially nice to be in a place so cosmopolitan where I actually agree with most of the bumper stickers." But he went on to celebrate all the comforts and conveniences of their home near campus in South Bend, with frequent trips on the South Shore into Chicago to the Art Institute and the Lyric Opera. Music played a large part in his life. In a letter to Ken Smith 2 years ago, he wrote, "I don't know if your daughter is still interested in Celtic music, but the Naxos Library just listed a nice Cape Breton fiddle album by David Greenberg that I am playing right now. I bet she'd like it." With Bose speakers next to his favorite reading chair with a laptop at hand, he listened a lot through the library connection. It's really cool to find virtually anything I want to hear at short notice, as, for example, the talented young pianist who played Chopin's first concerto at the symphony on Saturday. Jufang Huang has put her recording of Scarlatti's sonatas on Naxos. Chuck was himself a musician, though he would have laughed at that title. To a party of faculty and friends in an apartment on Northside Drive about 1983, he brought his mandolin, Glenn Chestnut brought his guitar, and a group of us, fugitives from the undergraduate 60s, performed a professorial hootenanny. Someone might have played a banjo, or should have. Chuck had a fine, measured prose style and a patient, amused presence at departmental meetings. He managed to stay above academic politics, that most paltry exercise of power. Ken Smith remembers, after an administrator announced that pigs would fly before a certain benefit would ever return to the English department, Chuck boosted our morale by bringing a battery-operated winged pig to our monthly meetings. He affixed the little creature by fishing line to the ceiling, and we applauded as it flew a tight circle above us. The emblem of the flying pig remains the department mascot and appears on the annual calendar. When his country prepared too casually for war some years ago, and many folks gathered on campus to read famous war poems or poems about war, he arrived with a surprising, little-known, well-aimed passage from Byron that he read beautifully and movingly. He found music in those lines as surely as he did when he whistled lyrically on his way through the corridor at the end of a day of teaching. He was our Mr. Chips, riding his basic black English bicycle to and from campus, his briefcase fastened to the rear carrier, and in cool weather, wearing his black beret. He was a beloved man in an authentic mustache, who once asked, ironically, about some awful movie destined for a worst 10 movies list, but does it have a redeeming prurient interest? His students remember him with great love, and a good number of them conspired to throw a surprise party for him on his retirement. Thomas Hoffman writes, Dr. Harrington was a very learned scholar who could teach simply by being the kind soul that he was. I don't recall him ever having to resort to gimmicks to get a class's attention. Students who cared were kind and respectful, and those who wanted to learn wrote down what he had to say. He came to watch me teach at Howe Military School, an hour away from where he lived. Although I was petrified, I was sincerely happy he showed up, and then expounded on my lesson for the kids in class. Truly, he was the leader of the band. Years after being a student in Chuck's classes, Phyllis Moore Weitzel, then a lecturer in English, recalls, I sat beside him in a department meeting one day and listened while he read something he had written to share with colleagues. By that time, having read and responded to so much freshman writing, I had become starved for the beauty of language. As Chuck read his prose, my heart picked up a beat, and when he had finished, all I could say was, your writing is beautiful. Ever controlled as he was in his life and in the classroom, his writing was an extension of who he was, a man who whistled out a life well lived. Chuck Harrington led us by example, never conspicuous, never posturing or gesticulating, never insisting on himself, but always there in the truest way for his family, his colleagues, and his students, a caring, intelligent sensibility.
Try to remember the kind of September when life was slow and oh so mellow. Try to remember the kind of September when grass was green and grain was yellow. Try to remember the kind of September when you were a tender and callow fellow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Try to remember when life was so tender that no one wept except the willow. Try to remember when life was so tender and love was an ember about to billow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember the 1st of September that made us mellow. Deep in December, our hearts should remember and follow and follow and follow together. Deep deep in December, our hearts should remember and follow. Deep in December, our hearts should remember and follow, 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 follow.
very special are we for just a moment to be part of life's eternal ride. How very special are we to have on our family tree Mother Earth and Father Time. He turns the seasons around, and so she changes her gown, but they always look in their prime. They go on dancing their dance of everlasting romance, Mother Earth and Father Time. The summer larks return to sing. Oh, what a gift they give. And autumn days grow short and cold. Oh, what a joy to live. How very special are we for just a moment to be part of life's eternal rhyme. How very special are we to have on our family tree Mother Earth and Father Time.
I read this with many fond memories of summers with my dad and looking forward to many summers with my own son, Graham, with my dad in my heart. It's Once More to the Lake by E.B. White. One summer, along about 1904, my father rented a camp on a lake in Maine and took us there for the month of August. We all got ringworm from some kittens and had to rub Pond's extract on our arms and legs night and morning. and my father rolled over in a canoe with all his clothes on. But outside of that, the vacation was a success. And from then on, none of us ever thought there was any place in the world like that lake in Maine. We returned summer after summer, and always on August 1st for 1 month. I have since become a saltwater man, but sometimes in the summer there are days when the restlessness of the tides and the fearful cold of the seawater and the incessant wind that blows across the afternoon and into the evening make me wish for the placidity of a lake in the woods. A few weeks ago, this feeling got so strong I bought myself a couple of bass hooks and a spinner and returned to the lake where we used to go for a week's fishing and to revisit old haunts. I took along my son, who had never had any fresh water up his nose and who had seen lily pads only from train windows. On the journey over to the lake, I began to wonder what it would be like. I wondered how time would have marred this unique, this holy spot, the coves and streams, the hills that the sun set behind, the camps and the paths behind the camps. I was sure that the tarred road would have found it out, and I wondered in what other ways it would be desolated. It is strange how much you can remember about places like that once you allow your mind to return into the grooves that lead back. You remember one thing, and that suddenly reminds you of another thing. I guess I remembered clearest of all the early mornings when the lake was cool and motionless. Remembered how the bedroom smelled of the lumber that it was made of and the wet woods whose scent entered through the screen. The partitions in the camp were thin and did not extend clear to the top of the rooms, and as I was always the first up, I would dress softly so as not to wake the others and sneak out into the sweet outdoors and start out in the canoe, keeping close along the shore in the long shadows of the pines. I remembered being very careful never to rub my paddle against the gunwale for fear of disturbing the stillness of the cathedral. But when I got back there with my boy and we settled into camp near the farmhouse and into the kind of summertime I had known, I could tell that it was going to be pretty much the same as it had been before. I knew it lying in bed the first morning, smelling the bedroom and hearing the boy sneak quietly out and go along the shore in a boat. I began to sustain the illusion that he was I, and therefore by simple transposition that I was my father. The sensation persisted, kept cropping up all the time we were there. It was not an entirely new feeling, but in this setting it grew much stronger. I seemed to be living a dual existence. I would be in the middle of some simple act. I would be picking up a bait box or laying down a table fork, or I would be saying something, and suddenly it would not be I, but my father who was saying the words or making the gesture. It gave me a creepy sensation. We went fishing that first morning. I felt the same damp moss covering the worms in the bait can and saw the dragonfly alight on the tip of my rod as it hovered a few inches from the surface of the water. It was the arrival of this fly that convinced me beyond any doubt that everything was as it always had been, that the years were a mirage, and that there had been no years. The small waves were the same, chucking the rowboat under the chin as we fished at anchor, and the boat was the same color green, the ribs broken in the same places, and under the floorboards the same freshwater leavings and debris, the wisp of moss, the rusty discarded fishhook, and the dried blood from yesterday's catch. We stared silently at the tips of our rods, at the dragonflies that came and went. I lowered the tip of mine into the water, tentatively, pensively dislodging the fly, which darted 2 feet away, poised, darted 2 feet back, and came to rest again a little further up the rod. There had been no years between the ducking of this dragonfly and the other one, the one that was part of the memory. I looked at the boy who was silently watching his fly, and it was my hands that held his rod, my eyes watching. I felt dizzy and didn't know which rod I was at the end of. Summertime, oh summertime, pattern of life indelible, the fade-proof lake, the woods unshatterable, the pasture with the sweet fern and the juniper, forever and ever, summer without end.
summertime and the living is easy. Fish are jumping and the cotton is high. Your daddy's rich and your ma is good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. One of these mornings you're gonna rise up singing. Yeah, you'll spread your wings and you'll take to the sky. But till that morning, there is nothing can harm. With daddy and mommy standing by.
competition, 103, I think it was, the freshman or somebody, you had to take some time. You couldn't get out of that. So, of course, I didn't want to, but so I think just to say something briefly, when professors have to teach courses like that, it's a good test of their integrity. And to take that seriously and the importance of getting those kinds of courses right. And I'm not sure if I did, but I know he got it right.
One of the most ancient cultures in the world, that the didgeridoo, the sounds produced by this instrument, somehow mysteriously open up portals to the spirit world. And that, again, this is all mystery and legend from the Australian people. I'm sure Dr. Harrington may have been familiar with some of these teachings and stories. Imagine if this were true. And Chuck is here with us now.
It's comforting to see so many friendly faces here this afternoon. Today, we've been remembering Chuck. Every selection in the program was carefully chosen because it pertained to Chuck's life in some way and helped us to remember him. The reasons are listed on page 4 on your program, if you haven't found them yet. Chuck's field of interest in English literature was the late 18th century and the Romantics. He frequently quoted those authors: Sam Johnson, Burns, Byron, Wordsworth, Coleridge, and so on. They all wrote verse or prose on memory and remembrances. Yet Lord Byron, in one of his stanzas for music, expresses my remembrances of Chuck the best. They say that hope is happiness, but genuine love must prize the past. And memory wakes the thoughts that bless. They rose the first, they set the last. And all that memory loves the most was once our only hope to be, and all that hope adored and lost hath melted into memory. Alas, it is delusion all. The future cheats us from afar, nor can we be what we recall, nor dare we think on what we are. Chuck, too, had a way with words. Tom Vandeven referred to it in his essay, and he quoted colleagues who specifically remembered that talent. Several years ago, Chuck introduced me to a class of his as my best friend, my lover, my wife. Like Charlotte's messages in her web, his message was meaningful, precise, and concise. I was deeply moved by that introduction, but not surprised, for he had written such sweet sentiments to me in love notes and valentines. Today, I reciprocate and honor him as my best friend, my lover, my husband. But he was more, much more. To paraphrase E.B. White, he was in a class by himself. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Chuck was both. Thank you all for coming and sharing memories. Please join me and the family for a reception in the lobby, where, in the words of Bobby Burns, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for Auld Lang Syne. Unfortunately, due to moral Hoosier politicians, it is not the cup of kindness that Bobby Burns would drink, nor what Chuck would order. Thank you.